The text came through at 6:12 p.m., right as I was seasoning chicken breast for one. Family meeting. Urgent. 7:30. Back room at Hunter's Steakhouse. Don't be late. No, hello. No, how are you doing, Mom? Just a command from my eldest son, Jason, typed out like I was an employee he was summoning to a conference room. I stood there in my kitchen, phone in one hand, pepper grinder in the other, reading those words over and over until they blurred. At 68 years old, I'd learned to tell the difference between a genuine emergency and manufactured urgency. And family meeting with Jason always meant one thing lately. He wanted to talk about my plans, my house, my laundromats, my lake cabin, my life, me. The chicken sat there on the cutting board, half-seasoned. I set down the pepper and wiped my hands on a dish towel, slowly, methodically, the way I used to wipe down tools at the end of a shift in the Air Force. 20 years of military logistics taught me that when something feels wrong, it usually is. Before we go any further, let me tell you something. Right now, as I'm sharing this story with you, I'm sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea. It's late December, and I can see the neighbor's Christmas lights still twinkling through my window. In just a couple of days, it'll be a brand new year. 2026. Hard to believe. I've been thinking a lot about new beginnings lately, about what really matters when you get to be my age. And I realized that what happened that night at Hunter's Steakhouse was my own kind of New Year moment. A fresh start I had to fight for. So I want to ask you something, wherever you are right now. Are you watching this at home? On your lunch break? Maybe you're doing dishes or folding laundry while you listen to me. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what you're doing right now. And with New Year just around the corner, do you have any resolutions or goals you're setting for yourself? I'd genuinely love to know. If this story is speaking to you at all, if you've ever felt cornered by people who were supposed to love you, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. Because what happens next, what I did in that room with 6 people staring me down, is something I think you need to hear. Trust me on this one. I stared at Jason's message a little longer. The words felt cold, clinical, like the kind of notice you get when someone's calling in a debt. My mind went back 2 months, to the day I'd fainted at my Colfax laundromat. I'd been hauling boxes of detergent in the heat, felt the room tilt, and woke up on the floor with my manager's worried face hovering over me. One night in the emergency room, a lecture from a doctor about hydration and respecting my age, and suddenly both my sons were looking at me like I'd become fragile overnight. Jason, especially. He'd sat by my hospital bed with that expression I recognized from when he was a teenager, trying to convince me to co-sign for a car. Worried, yes, but also calculating. Ever since that day, he'd been talking about plans, about making sure everything was in order, about how I couldn't just keep running businesses and managing properties at my age without thinking about what happens if something goes wrong. I picked up my phone again and typed a reply. I'm coming. Short, simple, because I needed him to think I was walking into that room blind. But I wasn't. I opened my messages and scrolled to another name, someone Jason didn't know about. Someone I'd been quietly consulting for the past 3 weeks, ever since I'd overheard a conversation I was never supposed to hear. I typed quickly. Got your message. 7:45. 3 dots appeared, then a single word. Ready. I set the phone down and looked at the chicken. My appetite had vanished. I wrapped the meat in foil, slid it into the fridge, and went to change out of my house clothes into something with pockets. Something with a waistband I could tuck things into if I needed to. Something that said, I'm not prey. Hunter's Steakhouse sat just off the highway outside Denver. The kind of place with framed football jerseys on the walls and waiters who called everyone ma'am and sir. Jason knew I liked their prime rib. He also knew they had private rooms in the back, tucked away from the noise of the main dining area. I pulled into the parking lot at 7:28, 2 minutes early, deliberate. The hostess greeted me with a professional smile and led me past tables full of families cutting into ribeyes and couples sharing dessert. The sounds were warm, normal, safe. We turned down a quiet corridor. The carpet muffled our steps. The air smelled like grilled meat and peppercorn sauce, but my stomach felt like dry cotton. The hostess stopped in front of a door marked "Reserved" and knocked lightly before opening it. The second I stepped inside, I knew this wasn't about dinner. No menus, no breadbasket, no plates. Just a long, polished table, a glass pitcher of water sweating onto a coaster, and a stack of papers fanned out in front of a man I'd never met. He was in his 40s, maybe early 50s, wearing a navy suit that looked expensive. His hair was combed back, and his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. A closed laptop sat in front of him like a prop. Jason was there, of course, 39 years old, wearing one of those fitted shirts he bought when he wanted to look successful. His hair was styled like he was posing for a real estate billboard. He didn't stand when I walked in. Didn't even look up right away. His wife Courtney sat beside him, nails freshly manicured, lips pressed into a thin line that made the lipstick bleed slightly at the edges. She looked at me the way you'd look at a problem that needed solving. On Courtney's other side sat her parents, Harold and Jean, dressed like it was Sunday service. Harold's jaw was set, Jean's hands folded. They nodded at me but didn't smile. At the far end of the table, shoulders hunched, eyes on the wood grain, was my younger son Ryan, 36 years old and looking like he wished he could disappear through the floor. 6 people, all of them staring at me. The man in the suit closed his laptop with a soft click and extended his hand across the table. "Mrs. Pollard," he said smoothly, "I'm Andrew Neal. I help families with estate transitions." Estate transitions. That's a nice way to say, sign your life away. Jason gestured at the empty chair in the middle of the table, directly across from Andrew, like a judge inviting a witness to the stand. "Sit down, Mom," he said. His voice was tight, impatient. "We don't have all night." I stayed standing. "I didn't know we were meeting an attorney," I said quietly. "Your text just said family." Courtney let out a short laugh, sharp as broken glass. "You're always saying you want things clear," she said. "This is how we make it clear." Andrew slid the top set of papers toward the center of the table, stopping exactly where my hands would land if I reached out. His movements were practiced, smooth, like he'd done this 100 times before. "These documents," he said, his tone calm and professional, "simply put into writing what's fair. Given your recent health scare, your age, and the value of your assets, it would be reckless not to make changes now, while you're still able." The words, "still able," hung in the air like smoke. I felt the room tilt slightly, not from low blood sugar this time, from the realization that this wasn't a discussion, it was a setup. Jason leaned forward, elbows on the table. "We're offering you a solution before things get messy," he said. "Sign the transfer now, while you can, and we can keep everything out of court, out of probate, out of the hands of outsiders who don't care about this family." Courtney's mother folded her hands and added softly, "We just want to protect you, Helen." Protect me. The words should have sounded kind. They didn't. I looked at Ryan. He was staring at the table like he could burn a hole through it with his eyes. His jaw was clenched. I could see the tension in his shoulders. Jason's patience snapped like a rubber band pulled too tight. "Sign, Mom," he hissed, voice low and venomous, "or we'll ruin you." The words landed in the center of that polished table, heavier than the stack of paper Andrew had slid toward me. I let the silence stretch. Let them sit in it. Let them think I was scared. Then I did something I hadn't done since my days in the Air Force, standing in front of younger recruits who thought rank equaled power. I started counting. I lifted my hand, pointing one finger at each face around the table. 1, I said, looking directly at Jason. 2, at Courtney. 3, at Harold. 4, at Jean. 5, at Andrew, who shifted uncomfortably in his expensive suit. My hand paused over Ryan. He looked up at me, confused, torn. 6, I finished softly. Jason's mouth opened, but I kept talking. 6 of you, I said. 6 people who think you're circling a wounded animal. Jason's expression darkened. Mom, this isn't... I smiled then. Not the polite smile I used on customers at the laundromat. Not the tight smile I'd learned to wear when neighbors asked invasive questions. A different smile. The one that showed up when everything finally snapped into focus. "Funny," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Because I only brought one." I nodded toward the door. Right on cue, there was a sharp knock. The handle turned. Every head in the room swung toward the entrance. The hostess stepped aside, and a woman walked in. She was in her 50s, wearing a charcoal suit, red-framed glasses resting low on her nose, a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Her heels clicked on the hardwood floor. Her expression was calm, professional, unshakable. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice smooth as steel. "I'm Natalie Porter, Helen's attorney." Jason's face drained of color. My one had walked in. You're probably wondering how a 68-year-old woman ends up in a private dining room with her own attorney waiting in the wings like some kind of backup plan. How I knew to prepare for an ambush. How I stayed calm when my own son threatened to ruin me. Let me properly introduce myself. My name is Helen Pollard. I'm 68 years old, and I've spent most of my life learning how to stay 3 steps ahead of people who underestimate me. The truth is, I learned how to count long before that night at Hunter's Steakhouse. I was born in Pueblo, Colorado, in a 2-bedroom house that sat 3 blocks from the steel mill. My father was a mechanic. Grease under his fingernails, oil stains on his jeans, a man who could take apart an engine and put it back together like he was solving a puzzle. My mother was a librarian at the public branch on Main Street. She smelled like old books and lavender hand cream. We didn't have much, but we had full bellies and a roof that didn't leak, and my parents taught me that those things mattered more than square footage or fancy cars. I was the middle child. My older brother went to work at the mill right after high school. My younger sister married young and stayed in Pueblo. But me? I wanted to see more than our block. More than the same streets my parents had walked their whole lives. At 19, I walked into an Air Force recruitment office on a Tuesday afternoon. The recruiter was a sharp woman in uniform who talked about logistics like it was a grand chessboard. Moving fuel, parts, people, medicine, making sure the right things got to the right places at the right times. She made it sound like strategy, like power. I signed up that day. Basic training at Lackland was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I'd grown up scrappy, sure, but there's a difference between tough and disciplined. The Air Force taught me discipline. Wake up at the same time. Fold your clothes the same way. Follow the chain of command. Do your job so well that the person above you and the person below you both know they can count on you. I wasn't the fastest runner. I wasn't the strongest lifter. But I was the one who remembered every detail. The one who saw patterns. The one who could look at a mess of paperwork and find the error that would have grounded an aircraft. My first assignment was inventory control at a supply depot in Texas. It sounds boring, doesn't it? Counting parts, tracking shipments, filing reports. But I learned something critical in those long, hot warehouses. Whoever controls the paperwork controls the outcome. If a part got shipped to the wrong base, planes stayed grounded. If someone signed off on bad documentation, entire missions got delayed. People think logistics is about boxes and lists. It's not. It's about seeing the whole picture while everyone else is staring at one corner. One time, a senior officer signed off on a fuel shipment that didn't match the requisition form. The numbers were close, but not exact. Everyone else had approved it. It was Friday afternoon. People wanted to go home. I flagged it. Turned out the fuel was contaminated. If it had been loaded, we would have had aircraft coming back with engine failures. People could have died. The officer who'd signed off on it was furious at first, thought I was showing him up. But my commander called me into his office the next week and told me something I never forgot. "Pollard," he said, "the people who succeed in this system aren't the ones who follow orders blindly. They're the ones who know when something doesn't add up." I got promoted to specialist within 2 years, then staff sergeant by 25. I moved from base to base, learning new systems, managing bigger inventories, training younger airmen who thought they knew everything until a shipment went missing and they realized they didn't. I missed holidays. I missed birthdays. I missed my sister's wedding because I was stationed overseas. My mother used to send letters asking when I'd come home, when I'd settle down, when I'd give her grandchildren. I wanted to tell her that I was home, that this life, these responsibilities, this sense of purpose was what felt right. But I also knew she wouldn't understand. In my late 20s, I made senior airman, then technical sergeant. I was good at what I did. People respected me, not because I was loud or aggressive, but because I was reliable, steady. The kind of person you wanted on your team when things got complicated. I believed back then that fairness mattered, that if you worked hard, if you did right by people, life would return the favor. That loyalty was a two-way street. I held on to that belief for a long time, maybe too long. By my mid-30s, I was managing entire supply chains for deployed units. I coordinated shipments to places I wasn't allowed to name in letters home. I tracked equipment worth millions of dollars. I made sure medics had what they needed, mechanics had their tools, pilots had their parts, and I loved it. But I also started feeling the weight, the missed connections, the relationships I couldn't maintain because I was always moving, always deployed, always responsible for something bigger than myself. At 38, I made Master Sergeant. It was the proudest moment of my career. My parents flew out to the ceremony. My mother cried. My father shook my hand and said, "You did good, kid." 2 years later, at 40, I retired. The ceremony was formal, folded flag, medals in a wooden box, a speech about service and sacrifice. People shook my hand and thanked me for 20 years of dedication. I stood there in my dress uniform, feeling the weight of everything I'd accomplished, and I wondered, what now? I wasn't old. I wasn't tired. I was 40 years old with a head full of skills and no idea how to apply them outside of a military structure. I moved back to Colorado, rented a small apartment in Denver, tried to figure out what a retired master sergeant does in the civilian world. That's when I met Peter. He was a mechanic, just like my father. Charming in that easy, confident way some men have. He could fix anything with an engine. He made me laugh. After 20 years of rigid schedules and life or death decisions, laughing felt like a vacation. We got married within a year. I thought I was building something, a family, a life that didn't revolve around shipments and supply chains. I had no idea I was about to learn another hard lesson about who controls the paperwork. And this time, it wouldn't be about fuel shipments or aircraft parts. It would be about money. My money. And the people who thought they had a right to it just because we shared a last name. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about Peter and Jason and the laundromats that became my second career, because that's where the real foundation was laid. The foundation Jason tried to rip out from under me in that steakhouse. The foundation I refused to let anyone take. Peter Pollard walked into my life 6 months after I retired from the Air Force. I was at a grocery store in Denver, standing in front of the cereal aisle trying to decide between brands I'd never had time to care about during my military years. He was in line behind me at the checkout, saw my Air Force veteran cap, and said something about his father having served in Korea. We ended up talking in the parking lot for 40 minutes. He had oil under his fingernails and an easy smile. He reminded me of my father in all the good ways, a man who understood machines. Who could take something broken and make it whole again? We dated for 8 months, got married at a small courthouse ceremony with my parents and his brother as witnesses. I was 41. He was 39. We rented a house in Lakewood, and I thought, finally, I can build something that isn't about supply chains and deployment schedules. I thought I was building a family. At first, Peter was everything I'd hoped for. He worked at a repair shop downtown, came home smelling like engine grease, kissed me on the forehead, and talked about someday opening his own garage. We were careful with money. We saved. We made plans. Jason was born when I was 42. 7 pounds, dark hair, lungs that could wake the entire maternity ward. I held him in that hospital room and felt something shift inside me. A fierce, protective love I hadn't expected. This was mine. Ours. A tiny person we were responsible for shaping. Peter was a good father in those early years. Patient, playful. He'd put Jason on his shoulders and walk around the backyard making engine noises. Ryan came 3 years later, quieter than his brother from the start. Where Jason demanded attention, Ryan seemed content to observe. Where Jason grabbed at toys, Ryan studied them first, turning them over in his small hands like he was solving a puzzle. Even as toddlers, you could see the difference. Jason wanted the biggest piece of cake, the shiniest toy, the loudest praise. Ryan wanted stories. He'd sit in my lap with a picture book, pointing at details I'd missed, asking questions about why things worked the way they did. I loved them both, fiercely, equally, but I started noticing things. Peter had always enjoyed the occasional scratch-off ticket, $1 here, $5 there. Harmless, I thought. Everyone has small vices. Then it became $20, then $50. Then he came home one night talking about a friend's investment opportunity. Something about flipping used boats. A sure thing, he said. We'd double our money in 6 months. I was hesitant. We had 2 small boys, a mortgage, daycare costs. But Peter was persuasive. And I wanted to believe in him, in us. We lost $4,000 when the friend disappeared and the boats turned out to be stolen property. I was furious. We fought. He apologized, promised it would never happen again. I believed him. 2 years later, he did it again. This time, it was a poker game with coworkers that turned into a regular thing. He swore he was good at it, that he was winning more than losing. Until the day I went to pay our mortgage and found out our savings account had $300 left instead of the $8,000 we'd been building. Jason was 7, Ryan was 4, and I was standing in our kitchen realizing that the man I'd married, the man I'd trusted, couldn't be trusted with money at all. That was the moment I stopped letting Peter touch our finances. I took over everything. Every bill, every account, every decision. He didn't fight me on it. I think part of him was relieved. But I also realized something that settled into my bones like cold water. No one was going to secure my future for me. Not Peter, not anyone. If I wanted stability, if I wanted to make sure my sons had what they needed, I had to build it myself. At 45 years old, I walked into a bank and applied for a small business loan. The loan officer was a man in his 50s who looked at me over his reading glasses and asked what kind of business I planned to start. When I said laundromat, he actually laughed. "That's a tough market," he said. "Lots of competition, high overhead. You have any experience in that industry?" "No," I said, "but I have 20 years of experience managing supply chains, tracking inventory, and making sure things run when everyone else thinks they'll fail. I can handle washing machines." He looked at my military records, my credit score, the modest savings I'd built back up after Peter's disasters. He approved the loan. The laundromat I bought was in a tired strip mall off Colfax. Half the machines were broken, the sign flickered, and the tile floor had cracks running through it like spider webs. The previous owner had given up and moved to Arizona, but I saw what everyone else didn't. There was a moving truck rental place next door. New apartment complexes going up 3 blocks away. A bus stop right out front. And no matter what the economy did, people needed clean clothes. I spent the first month fixing machines, scrubbing floors, replacing the sign. Peter helped with the mechanical repairs. He was good at that part. I'll give him that. Jason was 8 when we opened. He'd come with me after school, sit on top of a washing machine eating a candy bar while I counted quarters and rolled them into paper sleeves. He loved the noise, the customers, the feeling that this place was ours. Ryan, at 5, was quieter. He'd bring a book and read in the corner, occasionally looking up to watch me negotiate with a supplier or help a customer figure out which setting to use. By the time Jason was a teenager, we had 3 locations, the original on Colfax, another near the university, and a third in a neighborhood that was just starting to gentrify. Jason started rolling his eyes when I talked about budgets, about profit margins, about the boring details that made the difference between success and failure. "Mom, you're obsessed," he'd say. "It's just laundromats." But it wasn't just laundromats. It was security. It was proof that I could build something from nothing, that I didn't need to depend on anyone. Ryan, even as a teenager, seemed to understand that. He'd help me sweep floors on weekends, wear his headphones, and work quietly, never complaining. By the time I was 55, I could pay every bill without worrying. I could afford small luxuries. I had built something solid. And then Peter reminded me why I'd built it alone. I found out about the affair the way most people do. A text message that popped up on his phone while he was in the shower. A woman's name I didn't recognize. Words that made my stomach turn. Her name was Crystal. She was a blackjack dealer in Las Vegas. He'd met her on a weekend trip with friends. I confronted him. He didn't deny it. Said he felt like a failure next to me, that I didn't need him anymore, that Crystal made him feel important. I told him to pack his things. The divorce took 6 months. He didn't fight for the house or the businesses. Maybe he knew he didn't have a leg to stand on. Maybe Crystal had already promised him a fresh start in Vegas. I kept everything, the house, the laundromats, my pride, and I made myself a promise. My heart might heal, but my money would never again go into someone else's hands. Jason was 25 when his father left. Old enough to understand what had happened, old enough to see the paperwork, the lawyers, the way assets got divided. Old enough to absorb the wrong lesson. I watched him watching me during that time, saw the way he studied the documents I signed, the way he asked questions about what I was keeping, what Peter was getting, how it all worked. At the time, I thought he was just being supportive, curious. Now I know he was learning, watching, taking notes, learning that whoever controls the paperwork controls the outcome. I just didn't realize he'd one day try to use that lesson against me. The thing about getting older is that your body starts reminding you of your age in ways you can't ignore. I was 66 when it happened, late July. One of those Denver afternoons when the heat shimmers off the pavement and the air feels thick enough to chew. I was at my Colfax laundromat, the original one, hauling boxes of detergent from the storage room to restock the vending machine. Each box weighed about 30 pounds. I'd done this hundreds of times before. Thousands, probably. But that day, halfway across the floor, the room started to tilt. I remember thinking, just set the box down. Just put it down and sit for a minute. But my body didn't listen. The edges of my vision went gray, then black, and the last thing I felt was the cool tile against my cheek. I woke up to my manager Rosa's face hovering over mine, her hand on my shoulder, her voice high and scared. "Mrs. Pollard, can you hear me? The ambulance is coming. Just stay still." Ambulance. The word made me want to argue, to say I was fine, that I just needed water and a minute in the air conditioning, but my mouth felt like cotton and my head was pounding. The paramedics were professional and kind. They took my vitals, asked me questions, loaded me onto a stretcher despite my protests. Rosa rode with me, holding my purse, promising to lock up the store. The emergency room was bright and cold. Monitors beeped. A doctor who looked younger than Ryan came in, checked my charts, and told me I was severely dehydrated, that I needed to respect my age. That hauling heavy boxes in 100-degree heat was reckless. I wanted to tell him I'd spent 20 years in the Air Force doing far harder things, but I was too tired to argue. They kept me overnight for observation, said my electrolytes were off, that I needed rest. Jason and Ryan both showed up within an hour of each other. Ryan came straight from work, still in his uniform from the grocery store where he managed the produce section. He sat beside my bed, held my hand, asked quiet questions about how I was feeling. Jason arrived in a button-down shirt, hair perfect, smelling like expensive cologne. He stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, and I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. "What if this had been worse, Mom?" he said softly. "What if you'd hit your head? What if Rosa hadn't been there?" His tone was concerned, loving even, but there was something underneath it, something that made my stomach tighten. "I'm fine," I said. "Just got overheated. It happens." "It shouldn't happen," Jason replied. You're 66. You're running 3 businesses by yourself. You need to start thinking about what happens if something goes wrong. Real wrong. Ryan shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. Jace, she just woke up. Maybe we can talk about this later. Jason ignored him. I'm just saying, if Mom doesn't have a plan, if she doesn't have things set up properly, it's going to be chaos. For all of us. The doctor came back in before I could respond, and Jason dropped the subject. But I saw the look he gave Ryan, a look that said, "We'll talk about this later." I went home the next day with instructions to drink more water, take it easy, and follow up with my regular doctor. Jason called me 3 days later. "I want to bring someone by," he said. "A financial planner. Young guy, really sharp. He specializes in helping people our age get their affairs in order." Our age. Like he was 68 instead of 37. I hesitated. "Jason, I have things in order. I have a will. I have accounts set up." "When's the last time you updated any of it?" he pressed. "Things change, Mom. Tax laws change. You need someone who knows the current rules." I agreed. Mostly because I was tired of arguing, and because part of me knew he had a point. I hadn't looked at my will in years. The planner's name was Franklin. Mid-30s, expensive suit, briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. He sat at my kitchen table with Jason beside him, both of them looking at me like I was a client instead of a mother and homeowner. Ryan was there too, sitting quietly at the end of the table, sipping coffee and listening. Franklin spread out charts and graphs, talked about estate taxes and probate and avoiding headaches for the boys when I passed. He made it sound like dying was a logistical problem I needed to solve. Every sample plan he showed me had the same structure. Jason as primary executor, Jason as trustee, Jason managing the laundromats, the house, the cabin. Ryan listed as backup, but only as backup. "Why is it set up this way?" I asked. Franklin glanced at Jason before answering. "Well, typically we recommend putting the person with financial expertise in the primary role. Jason has experience in real estate, he understands investments, and he's geographically close to your properties. Ryan is certainly capable, but this structure just makes sense from a management perspective." I looked at Ryan. His jaw was tight, but he said nothing. "What if I want it split equally?" I asked. "What if I want both my sons to have equal say?" Jason leaned forward, his tone patient but firm. "Mom, that sounds fair, but it's not practical. What happens when Ryan and I disagree? Who makes the final call? You need someone in charge, someone who can make decisions quickly." He paused, then added, "And honestly, Ryan has a simpler life. He's not married, he doesn't have kids, he doesn't need the responsibility. I have Courtney. I have the grandkids to think about. I'm the one who should be handling the complicated stuff." Ryan's knuckles went white around his coffee mug, but he stayed silent. I felt the pressure building, not the loud, obvious kind, the quiet kind, the kind that comes wrapped in concern and logic and charts on expensive paper. "I need to think about this," I said finally. Franklin smiled. "Of course. Take your time. But I will say, the sooner you get this done, the better. Especially after your health scare. You don't want to leave things uncertain." Jason walked Franklin out. When he came back, he kissed my forehead. "Just think about it, Mom. I'm only trying to help. I don't want you worrying about this stuff. Let me carry the load." After they left, I stood at the kitchen sink washing coffee mugs and replaying the conversation. Jason's tone had been loving, concerned, reasonable. So why did I feel like I'd just sat through a sales pitch? Why did every plan put him in control and Ryan in the background? And why, when I'd asked about equality, had Jason made it sound like I was being difficult instead of fair? I dried the last mug and set it in the cabinet. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. I thought about my years in the Air Force, about the officers who smiled while maneuvering you into a corner, about the people who used the word help when they really meant control. I didn't sign anything that day. And deep in my gut, I knew that was the right choice. Even if I didn't yet know why. 3 weeks passed after that kitchen table meeting with Franklin, the financial planner. Jason called twice, asking if I'd made a decision. Both times I told him I was still thinking, still reviewing my options. He didn't push hard, which surprised me. Maybe he thought time and patience would wear me down. Or maybe he was working on a different approach. It was a Tuesday evening, about 8:15. I'd spent the day running errands, paying bills, and checking in at my university location. My last stop was always the Colfax laundromat, the original store, where I liked to do a final walkthrough before heading home. I parked in the back lot like I always did. The front was for customers. The back entrance led directly to the small office and storage area, away from the noise of machines and the fluorescent lights of the main floor. The sun was setting, painting the sky that particular shade of purple that only happens in late summer. The air had finally cooled down. I could hear the hum of the machines through the back wall, a steady rhythm I found comforting after all these years. I unlocked the back door and stepped into the narrow hallway. The office door was closed, which was normal. Rosa usually locked up around 7:30, but sometimes she stayed late to finish paperwork. Then I heard voices. I stopped, hand on my keyring, about to knock. The voice was male. Familiar. Jason. My first thought was confusion. Why would Jason be here? He never came to the laundromats. He thought they were beneath him. Too blue-collar. Too much work for too little glamour. I was about to push the door open when I heard the next words clearly through the thin wood. If we wait until she actually loses it, we lose control of the timeline. I froze. My hand hovered over the doorknob. My breath caught in my throat. We need her to sign now, Jason continued, voice low and calculated, while she's still pliable. While that fainting spell is fresh in everyone's mind. Pliable. The word landed in my chest like a stone. Another voice, female, sharper, Courtney. We build a case, she said. It's not hard. We start documenting every time she forgets something, every time she seems confused, every time she repeats herself. My mother's friend works at an evaluation clinic. She knows the right questions to ask, the right way to frame things. I pressed my back against the wall, my heart pounding so hard I was afraid they'd hear it. Capacity is a gray area, Courtney went on. The right evaluator, the right narrative, and we can make a judge see that she's not fit to manage her own affairs anymore. Then it doesn't matter what she wants. The court appoints someone, and that someone can be you. Jason made a sound like agreement. We just need enough documentation, enough concern. Then we file. My stomach turned. I felt like I might be sick right there in the hallway. They weren't talking about helping me. They were talking about building a case against me, about using doctors and evaluations and court systems to paint me as incompetent, about taking everything while making it look legitimate. Courtney's voice dropped lower. The key is not to rush. Let her think she has time. Let her think she's in control. Meanwhile, we collect, we document, we create a pattern. What about Ryan? Jason asked. Ryan's soft. He'll do whatever you tell him if you frame it right. Tell him it's for her own good. Tell him she's getting forgetful and you're worried. He'll back you up without even realizing what he's backing. There was a pause. I could hear papers shuffling. How long do you think we have? Jason asked. 6 months, maybe a year. But the longer we wait, the more chance she locks things down with her own lawyer, or changes her will, or does something that boxes us out. We need to move while she's still shaken from the hospital. I should have burst through that door. I should have confronted them right then, demanded to know what they thought they were doing. But 20 years in the Air Force had taught me something critical. Never reveal your position until you've mapped the whole field. I stepped backward, slowly, carefully, until I was back outside. My hands were shaking as I locked the door behind me. I walked to my car, got in, and sat there in the dark parking lot while my mind raced. The shock hit first. That cold, hollow feeling when someone you love shows you who they really are, when the mask slips and you see the calculation underneath. Then came the nausea. The physical revulsion of hearing your own son talk about you like you were an obstacle, a problem to be managed, an asset to be acquired. But underneath both of those feelings, something else was rising. Something I recognized from my military days. from the moments when chaos erupted and everyone started shouting and I had to be the one who stayed calm, who saw the whole picture, who made the plan. Cold, focused clarity. Jason wasn't impatient. He wasn't just worried about his inheritance. He was actively strategizing around me, planning to use the system, use doctors, use my own health scare to strip away my autonomy. And Courtney, the woman I'd welcomed into my family, the mother of my grandchildren, was helping him build the case, coaching him, providing contacts and tactics. They thought I was vulnerable, alone, unaware. They were planning to make me look incompetent so they could take control legally, so no one could accuse them of stealing. They'd have court orders, official documentation, the appearance of concern and responsibility. It was brilliant, in a terrible way, and it would have worked if I hadn't heard them. I sat in that parking lot for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the sky turn from purple to black. I thought about all the times Jason had visited after the hospital, all the concerned phone calls, all the gentle suggestions about planning and paperwork. All of it had been theater, strategy, maneuvering me into position. I thought about Franklin, the financial planner, with his charts that put Jason in control of everything. Had Jason already planned to use those documents as proof that I'd agreed to hand things over? Would he have claimed I signed them, even if I hadn't? I thought about the word pliable. That's what he thought I was. Soft, moldable, easy to shape. He'd forgotten who raised him. He'd forgotten that I spent 2 decades managing chaos, that I knew how to see patterns, that I understood the difference between genuine concern and calculated manipulation. In that parking lot, I made a decision. I would never walk into another room unprepared. I would never let them catch me off guard again. I would never sign anything, agree to anything, or trust anything that came from Jason's mouth without verification. And I would find someone who could help me build a defense as strong as their offense. Someone they didn't know about. Someone who understood the law the way I understood logistics. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. My hands had stopped shaking. My mind was clear. Jason thought he was circling a wounded animal. He had no idea he was waking up a master sergeant. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold while I stared at a business card I'd kept in my desk drawer for nearly 5 years. Natalie Porter, attorney at law. The card was slightly bent at one corner, the ink faded from age, but the phone number was still legible. I'd met Natalie when I had a contract dispute with a vendor who tried to overcharge me on commercial washing machines. She was straightforward, sharp, and didn't waste time with unnecessary sympathy or small talk. She helped me resolve the issue in 3 weeks without going to court. She was exactly the kind of person I needed now. At 7 in the morning, I called her office. The receptionist said Natalie had an opening at 2 that afternoon. I took it. The law office was in a modest building downtown, nothing fancy. No marble floors or floor-to-ceiling windows, just a practical space with good lighting and worn carpet that had seen plenty of foot traffic. Natalie's office was small but organized. Beige walls, a desk covered in neat stacks of folders, a plant in the corner that looked like it had survived purely out of stubbornness. She stood when I walked in, extending her hand. She was in her early 50s, gray streaking through dark hair she wore pulled back, glasses perched on her nose. Her handshake was firm. "Mrs. Pollard," she said, "good to see you again. Please, sit." I sat in the chair across from her desk and suddenly didn't know where to start. She must have seen the hesitation on my face, because she leaned back and said simply, "Take your time. Start wherever feels right." So I did. I told her about the fainting spell, about waking up in the hospital with Jason already calculating, about the kitchen table meeting with Franklin, the financial planner, and the documents that put Jason in charge of everything. I told her about the conversation I'd overheard at the laundromat, about the words pliable and capacity and building a case. Natalie listened without interrupting. She took notes occasionally, her pen moving in quick, precise strokes. She didn't gasp or shake her head or tell me how awful it was. She just listened like she was gathering evidence. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. What you're describing is a textbook example of undue influence, she said. That's when someone uses pressure, manipulation, or timing to get control over another person's assets. Courts take it very seriously, especially when it involves elderly individuals and family members in positions of trust. I'm not elderly, I said automatically. She smiled slightly. I know, but the law considers anyone over 65 to be in a protected category. It's meant to help people like you, not insult them. I nodded, feeling oddly reassured. The good news, Natalie continued, is that you haven't signed anything yet. You're still in control. But we need to move quickly to make sure you stay in control. She pulled out a fresh legal pad and started writing. Here's what I recommend. First, we update your will with clear, fair distributions to both sons, not equal necessarily, but fair and documented with your reasoning. That protects you from claims that you were confused or playing favorites. I felt a weight lift slightly. Second, we name a neutral third party as your fiduciary in case you ever do become incapacitated. Not Jason, not Ryan. A professional who has no stake in your estate and whose only job is to follow your instructions. Can I do that? I asked. Can I just bypass my sons? Absolutely, Natalie said. It's your estate. You can structure it however you want, and given what you've told me, having a neutral party protects both you and Ryan. It takes away Jason's ability to claim he should be in charge just because he's the oldest or because he has kids. She kept writing. Third, we move your businesses and home into a limited liability company with detailed operating instructions. That creates a legal structure that's harder to challenge or manipulate. Everything has rules. Everything has documentation. My mind flashed back to my Air Force days, to supply chains and procedures and the power of good paperwork. Fourth, we set up a separate trust for your grandchildren. Money that goes directly to them when they reach a certain age, completely separate from anything Jason or Courtney can touch. I felt tears prick at my eyes, not from sadness, from relief, from the realization that someone was taking me seriously, that I wasn't overreacting or being paranoid. How long will this take? I asked. 2 weeks if we move fast, Natalie said. I'll draft everything, we'll review it together, and then we execute it with witnesses. Everything will be legal, documented, and ironclad. She paused, tapping her pen against the pad. There's one more thing I want you to consider, she said. Colorado is a one-party consent state for recording. That means you can legally record conversations you're part of without telling the other person. My stomach flipped. You want me to record Jason? I want you to protect yourself, Natalie said carefully. If he tries to pressure you again, if he makes threats or tries to manipulate you into signing something, having audio evidence is powerful. Not just for court, but for clarity. Sometimes people will deny they ever said something. A recording removes all doubt. I thought about Jason's voice through that office door, about how easily he'd talked about making me look incompetent, about Courtney's strategic planning. Is that paranoid? I asked quietly. Natalie's expression softened, but her voice stayed firm. It's not paranoia when someone has already shown you they're willing to lie. It's preparation. We spent another hour going through details. Bank accounts, property deeds, business licenses, every asset I owned, every decision that needed protection. When I finally stood to leave, Natalie walked me to the door. Mrs. Pollard, she said, I want you to know something. What Jason is planning isn't just morally wrong, it's legally questionable. If he tries to file for guardianship or conservatorship based on false documentation, that's fraud. If he opens accounts or makes inquiries using your information without permission, that's identity theft. You're not overreacting. You're responding appropriately to a real threat. I shook her hand, feeling something I hadn't felt since that night in the parking lot. Control. Not the brittle, defensive kind, the solid kind, the kind that comes from having a plan and someone competent on your side. I walked out of that office into the bright afternoon sunlight and realized I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was 3 steps ahead. Jason thought he was building a case. He didn't know I was building a fortress. The next 2 weeks moved faster than any I could remember. Natalie worked like someone who understood that time mattered. She drafted documents, sent them to me for review, answered my questions in language I could understand instead of legal jargon that made my head spin. We met 3 times in her office, going through every detail. She explained what each paragraph meant, why certain language was used, what protections each section provided. On a Thursday afternoon, with 2 witnesses Natalie had brought from her firm, neither of them family, I signed my new will. It was fair. Both sons would receive inheritances, but the amounts were carefully calculated based on need, contribution, and circumstances. Ryan, who'd never asked for a thing, who'd swept floors and stayed loyal, received more. Jason received less, but not nothing. Enough to help his kids with college. Enough to show I hadn't cut him out in anger. Just not enough to reward threats. The neutral fiduciary was a man named Robert Skinner from a professional trust company. I'd never met him. That was the point. He had no emotional stake, no family connection. His job was to follow my instructions exactly as written if I ever became unable to make decisions myself. The LLC for my businesses and property took longer to set up. Natalie worked with an accountant to make sure everything transferred cleanly. I became the managing member with detailed rules about succession, sale, and management. Everything had a procedure. Everything had documentation. The trust for my grandchildren was the part that made me cry. $5,000 for each child, held until they turned 25. Not a fortune, but enough to help with a down payment or grad school or whatever dreams they had. Money that Jason and Courtney couldn't touch, couldn't redirect, couldn't use as leverage. When everything was signed and filed and official, I sat in Natalie's office feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I'd protected myself, heavier because I'd had to. "How do you feel?" Natalie asked. "Like I just built a bunker," I said, which is not how a mother should feel about her own son. She nodded but didn't offer false comfort. I appreciated that. "There's one more thing," she said, sliding a small box across her desk. "I picked this up for you. It's a digital voice recorder, simple to use. Just press this button to record, this one to stop. It saves everything to an internal chip." I stared at the device. It was smaller than my phone, black and plain. "You really think I'll need this?" "I think if Jason tries anything else, you'll want proof," Natalie said. "You don't have to use it, but having it ready means you're prepared." I took the box home and spent an evening practicing, pressing record, speaking into it, playing back my own voice, which sounded older and more tired than I expected. The idea of recording Jason felt wrong, like spying, like I was the one doing something dishonest. But then I remembered his voice through that office door, remembered the word pliable. This wasn't spying, it was documenting. 4 days after I signed the new will, Jason called. "Hey, Mom," he said, tone casual. "Just checking in. Have you had a chance to think about the paperwork Franklin left? We really should get that wrapped up." I kept my voice light, easy. "I'm handling it," I said, "taking care of everything." "With Franklin?" he pressed. "I'm working with someone," I said, which was true without being specific. There was a pause. I could almost hear him calculating. "Okay," he said slowly. "Well, if you need any help, let me know. I could come by this week." "Sure," I said. "That'd be nice." We hung up and I felt my stomach tighten. Something about his tone had shifted. He was being too careful, too casual. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, he showed up unannounced. I was in my living room reading when I heard his car in the driveway. Through the window, I watched him get out, check his phone, then walk toward the front door. I grabbed my cardigan from the chair and slipped it on. The recorder was in the right pocket where I'd started keeping it, just in case. My hand shook slightly as I pressed the record button before opening the door. Jason smiled when he saw me, the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Morning, Mom. Thought I'd stop by. See how you're doing." "I'm fine," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "This is a surprise." "I know. I should have called. I just had some errands nearby." We sat in the living room. He asked about my week, about the laundromats, about whether I'd been feeling okay since the hospital. Normal questions. Son checking on his mother. But I could feel him working towards something. It took about 10 minutes. So, he said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, have you made any decisions about the estate stuff? I know Franklin gave you a lot to think about. I'm exploring options, I said carefully. His expression tightened just slightly. What kind of options? Just making sure everything's set up the way I want it. With Franklin? With professionals, I said. Jason sat back, and I saw something flicker across his face. Frustration, maybe anger. Mom, you know I only want what's best for you, right? I'm trying to make this easy, simple. I know, I said. Then why are you making it complicated? His tone had an edge now. Not quite accusatory, but pointed. We had a plan. Franklin had everything ready. All you had to do was sign. I wanted to review it more carefully, I said. For 2 months? Jason's voice rose slightly. How much reviewing do you need? Unless someone's telling you not to trust me. I stayed quiet. He stood up, pacing to the window and back. Look, I'm trying to be patient here, but you need to understand something. If you don't get this handled properly, if you wait too long or do something that doesn't make sense, it creates problems. Legal problems. Problems that could end up in court. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. What kind of problems? Jason turned to face me, and his expression was different now. Harder. The kind where people start questioning your capacity, where they look at your decisions and wonder if you're thinking clearly. Where judges get involved and start appointing people to manage your affairs because you're not doing it yourself. There it was, the threat wrapped in concern. Are you saying you'd take me to court? I asked quietly. I'm saying I'd have to protect you, he said. Even if you didn't like it. Even if you fought me. Because that's what good sons do. They step in when their mothers aren't making good choices. The room felt too small, too warm. What if I've already made my choices? I asked. Jason's jaw tightened. Then I hope they were smart ones. Because if they weren't, if you did something reckless or cut me out after everything I've done for you, that would look bad. Really bad. The kind of bad that makes people question your judgment. He grabbed his keys from the coffee table. Just think about it, Mom. Think about how much easier this could be if you'd just trust me. If you'd just let me help, instead of treating me like the enemy. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the handle. I love you, he said. But I won't stand by and watch you make mistakes that hurt this family. Then he was gone. I stood in my living room, hand pressed against my chest, feeling my heart race. After a few minutes, I pulled the recorder from my pocket and pressed stop. My hands shook as I rewound and pressed play. Jason's voice came through clearly. Every word, every threat disguised as concern, every implication that he'd use the courts against me if I didn't comply. I sat on the couch and listened to the whole thing twice. Natalie had been right. I needed this, because Jason would absolutely deny saying these things. He'd claim I misunderstood, that I was confused, that he was only being loving. But the recorder didn't lie. I labeled the file with the date and Jason's name, stored it in a folder Natalie had given me for exactly this purpose. Then I sat there in the quiet house, looking at the family photos on the wall. Jason as a little boy, Ryan and Jason together at Christmas. Graduations and birthdays, and moments that felt like they belonged to different people. I felt powerful and broken at the same time. Powerful because I had evidence, because I'd prepared, because I wasn't walking into any more traps. Broken because I'd just recorded my own son threatening me. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was only the beginning. Natalie Porter stood in the doorway of that private dining room at Hunter's Steakhouse like she owned the space. She didn't rush, didn't apologize for the interruption. Just walked to the table with her leather portfolio under one arm and pulled out the chair directly across from Andrew Neal, the lawyer Jason had brought. "Mrs. Pollard," she said, nodding at me. "Good evening." I nodded back, not trusting my voice yet. Jason had gone pale. Courtney's mouth had formed a tight line. Harold and Jean looked confused, glancing between their daughter and this unexpected arrival. Ryan sat up straighter, something like hope flickering across his face. Andrew recovered first, clearing his throat and adjusting his tie. "I'm sorry," he said, voice smooth but strained. "This is a private family meeting. I don't believe we've met." Natalie set her portfolio on the table and opened it with deliberate precision. "Natalie Porter," she said, "I represent Mrs. Pollard, and actually this stopped being a private family meeting the moment you started presenting legal documents for signature under pressure." She pulled out a folder and slid a single sheet across to Andrew. "That's my letter of representation. As of 2 weeks ago, all communication regarding Mrs. Pollard's estate must go through me, which means this meeting shouldn't be happening at all." Andrew picked up the letter, scanned it, and set it down carefully. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out his next move. "Well," he said, attempting a diplomatic smile, "we're simply trying to help Mrs. Pollard get her affairs in order. There's no pressure here, just family looking out for family." Natalie reached across the table and pulled the stack of papers Andrew had prepared toward herself. She flipped through them, slowly, deliberately, reading sections out loud. "Transfer of full managerial authority to Jason Pollard for all real property, business assets, and financial accounts," she read. "Jason Pollard granted sole discretion to sell, lease, or liquidate any asset without prior approval from Helen Pollard." She looked up at Ryan. "Do you understand what that means? It means your brother could sell your mother's house, sell all 3 laundromats, empty her bank accounts, and she'd have no legal right to stop him. He wouldn't need her permission. He wouldn't even need to tell her." Ryan's face went from confused to shocked to angry in the span of 3 seconds. "Jason," he said quietly, "is that true?" Jason's hands clenched on the table. "It's standard estate management language. Mom would still benefit from everything. I'd just be handling the logistics." "No," Natalie said flatly. "Standard estate management includes oversight, reporting requirements, and limits on authority. This document has none of those protections. This is a blank check." She turned to me. "Mrs. Pollard, did you understand that signing this would mean you'd have no control over your own property?" "No," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I didn't." Andrew shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Porter, I think you're mischaracterizing the intent here." "Am I?" Natalie pulled out another page. "Because this section here discusses the process for establishing incapacity. It lists symptoms like forgetfulness, repetitive questions, and confusion as grounds for immediate transfer of full control to Jason. No medical evaluation required. No second opinion. Just Jason's word that his mother is declining." The room had gone very quiet. Natalie looked directly at Jason. "That's convenient, isn't it? Especially since I have documentation that you and your wife have discussed creating exactly that kind of narrative. Building a case, I believe were the words used. Finding the right evaluator, making it look like genuine concern." Jason stood up abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "That's a lie. I never said that." "Didn't you?" Natalie reached into her portfolio and pulled out a small evidence bag. Inside was a USB drive. She set it on the table between us. "Mrs. Pollard overheard a conversation at her Colfax location 3 weeks ago. A conversation between you and Courtney discussing exactly how to make your mother appear incompetent so you could take control of her assets. That conversation was recorded. If you're watching this right now, I need to pause and ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you trusted completely turned out to be planning against you? Maybe it was family, maybe a friend, maybe someone at work. How did you handle it? What would you have done in my place? Drop a comment and let me know your thoughts. And if this story is hitting home for you, if you're seeing yourself or someone you know in what I'm describing, please hit that like button and share this video. Someone in your life might need to hear this. Now, let me tell you what happened next." Courtney's face had gone from pink to white. She looked at Jason, then at her parents. "We were just talking," she said weakly. "We were worried. We were exploring options." "You were strategizing," Natalie corrected. "You discussed using medical evaluations as weapons. You talked about getting Ryan to sign false statements. You specifically used the words, 'while she's still pliable.'" Harold cleared his throat. Now wait just a minute. Jean and I don't know anything about any of this. We thought this was just about planning, about being responsible. That's what Jason told you, Natalie said. But it's not what Jason and Courtney were doing behind closed doors. She turned back to Andrew. Mr. Neal, I assume you prepared these documents in good faith, but you should know that your client has been operating under false pretenses. He's been building a fraudulent case of incapacity. He's been pressuring his mother, and just before I walked in, he threatened to ruin her if she didn't sign. Andrew's professional mask cracked. He looked at Jason with something between alarm and anger. Is that true? He asked. Did you threaten your mother? Jason's jaw worked. I told her the truth, that if she doesn't handle this properly, there will be consequences. That's not a threat. That's reality. That's a threat, Natalie said firmly. And it's on record, along with every other coercive statement you've made. She pulled out a notebook and flipped it open. Let's be clear about the rules going forward. 1. There will be no more surprise meetings. 2. There will be no more pressure, subtle or otherwise. 3. All contact regarding Mrs. Pollard's estate goes through me. 4. Any attempt to file for guardianship or conservatorship based on false information will be met with legal action for fraud and elder abuse. Jason exploded. Elder abuse? Are you kidding me? I'm trying to protect her. She's my mother. I've spent my whole life watching her build this, and now she's going to throw it away because Ryan got in her ear and convinced her I'm the enemy? He pointed at Ryan. This is your fault. You always wanted to be the favorite. You never had the guts to take responsibility for anything, so now you're manipulating her into cutting me out. Ryan stood slowly, his face red. I didn't manipulate anyone, Jason. I didn't ask her for a single thing. You're the one who brought lawyers and paperwork and threats. You're the one who tried to get me to sign a letter saying Mom was confused. I refused, remember? Jason's mouth opened, then closed. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but my voice came out clear. Jason, I said, you want to know what you could have done differently? He stared at me, jaw clenched. You could have asked, I said. If you'd come to me honestly and said you were worried about the future, if you'd suggested we plan together as a family, I would have listened. I would have been fair. I've always been fair. My voice cracked slightly, but I kept going. But you didn't ask. You planned around me. You talked about me like I was already gone. You brought lawyers I'd never met and papers designed to strip away my rights. You threatened to destroy me if I didn't comply. And you did it all while telling me it was because you loved me. Jason's face twisted. I do love you. Then why does your love look so much like control? I asked quietly. Why does helping me require taking everything I've worked for? He had no answer for that. Courtney grabbed her purse. Harold and Jean were already standing, clearly desperate to leave. Andrew gathered his papers with shaking hands, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Natalie stood and handed me my cardigan. We're done here, she said to the room. If anyone has questions or concerns moving forward, you can reach me at my office. She turned to Andrew. I assume you'll be withdrawing from any representation related to Mrs. Pollard's estate? Andrew nodded quickly. Yes, absolutely. I was not informed of the full circumstances. Jason stood frozen as everyone else moved toward the door. Courtney touched his arm, but he shook her off. As I walked past him, he grabbed my wrist, not hard, but firm enough to stop me. You're really going to do this? He said, voice low and hurt. You're really going to choose him over me? I looked down at his hand on my wrist, then up at his face. I'm not choosing anyone, I said. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. He let go. Natalie and I walked out together into the main dining room, where families were still eating steaks and laughing over dessert. The noise felt surreal after the tension of that back room. Outside, the night air was cool. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding. But underneath the adrenaline, I felt something else. Relief. Because I'd walked into that room prepared. Because I'd brought my one. Because I hadn't signed a single thing. Natalie walked me to my car. You did well in there, she said. I feel like I just blew up my family, I replied. You protected yourself from people who were willing to hurt you, she said. That's not the same thing. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. This isn't over, Natalie warned. Jason's going to be angry, embarrassed. He might try other tactics. We need to stay alert. I know, I said. I got in my car and sat there for a moment, watching Natalie drive away, watching the other diners through the restaurant windows living their normal lives. Then I started the engine and drove home, alone, knowing that whatever happened next, I'd face it standing upright. Not on my knees with a pen in my hand. 3 weeks passed after the steakhouse meeting. 3 weeks of silence that felt less like peace and more like the stillness before a storm. No calls from Jason, no texts, no surprise visits. Natalie had warned me. He's embarrassed. Men like Jason don't handle that well. He'll either back off completely or he'll look for another angle. Stay alert. I stayed alert. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning. My bank called about a refinancing inquiry I'd never submitted. When the manager pulled up the application, there was my name and social security number, but the contact information was all Jason's. His email, his cell phone, even the mailing address was his house in Aurora. This is identity fraud, the manager said bluntly. She flagged it in the system and gave me paperwork to file a fraud alert. I called Natalie from my car. Document everything, she said. We're building a file. 2 days later, a place called Memory and Cognitive Wellness Center called to confirm an evaluation appointment for the following Tuesday, an appointment I'd never made. It says here the appointment was made by your son Jason on your behalf, the receptionist said. He said you'd been having some memory concerns. My blood went cold. I never asked him to make that appointment. Please cancel it. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the wall. Jason was building a paper trail, creating evidence of concern, setting up evaluations I hadn't requested so he could later point to them and say I'd known something was wrong. On Sunday, after church, Betty Morrison pulled me aside in the parking lot. Helen, she said quietly, I need to ask you something. Are you feeling all right, mentally? The question landed like a punch. I'm fine, I said slowly. Why do you ask? Jason called me last week. He said he was worried about you, that you'd been forgetting things, repeating yourself. He said you'd gotten confused about financial matters and he was concerned you might be in the early stages of something. I felt heat rise in my chest, anger mixing with humiliation. Betty, I am not confused. Jason is upset because I made estate decisions he doesn't agree with. That's all this is. Betty studied my face, then nodded. I thought it seemed off. You've always been sharp as a tack. I drove home feeling exposed. How many other people had Jason called? How many were now looking at me sideways, wondering if I was losing my grip? That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and wrote down every incident. The bank inquiry, the cognitive center appointment, Betty's question. Every date, every person, every piece of documentation. I was washing my dinner dishes when I heard a knock at the front door. Through the window, I saw Ryan's truck in the driveway. Ryan sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he wasn't drinking. His jaw was tight. His eyes were red. Jason came to my house 3 nights ago, he said finally. Around 10:30. He'd been drinking. He said we had to stick together, that you were making decisions that didn't make sense. Ryan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He had a letter with him, already typed up. He smoothed it flat on the table. The letter was addressed to whom it may concern. It stated that I had been exhibiting signs of cognitive decline, that I repeated questions, that I forgot appointments, that I'd become confused about financial matters, that both my sons were concerned and felt I needed professional evaluation. At the bottom were 2 signature lines, one for Jason, one for Ryan. I felt like someone had knocked the air out of my lungs. He wanted you to sign this, I said. Yes. Ryan's hands clenched. He said it was just documentation, just in case. But none of it's true, Mom. You don't repeat yourself. You don't forget appointments. You run 3 businesses better than most people half your age. I told him that. What did he say? He got angry. Said I was choosing you over him, that I'd always been the favorite. He said if I didn't sign, I was basically calling him a liar, that I was destroying what was left of this family. Ryan looked up at me, tears in his eyes. I told him no. I told him I wouldn't sign something that wasn't true. He grabbed the letter and left, slammed my door hard enough that my neighbor's porch light came on. He wiped his eyes roughly. Mom, I love Jason. He's my brother. But I can't lie. Not about you. Not about something this serious. I squeezed his hand. You're not the one who asked him to bring you a false letter. You just refused to go along with something wrong. That takes courage. What do we do now? Ryan asked. I went to the drawer and brought back Natalie's card. You call her. You tell her exactly what you told me. Everything. You want me to be a witness against my own brother? I want you to be a witness for the truth, I said gently. There's a difference. Ryan stared at the card, then picked it up. Okay, I'll call her tomorrow. After Ryan left, I called Natalie and explained what had happened. She called back within 20 minutes. We need to file for a protective order, she said. Jason's escalating. The bank fraud, the medical appointments, the rumors, and now trying to get Ryan to sign a false statement. That's a pattern. We show the judge the evidence and ask the court to prohibit him from accessing your financial information or representing himself as your agent. Will he go to jail? I asked, surprised by the fear in my own voice. Not necessarily. We're not seeking criminal charges right now. We're seeking protection. But if he violates the order, there could be criminal consequences. I thought about Jason as a little boy, about teaching him to ride a bike, about his high school graduation. Then I thought about his voice through that office door, about the word pliable, about him trying to get Ryan to lie. Do it, I said. File whatever we need to file. The court will likely order mediation first, Natalie explained. Both sides sit down with a neutral third party and try to resolve things before it goes in front of a judge. It gives everyone a chance to agree to terms. And if we can't agree, then we go to court and let a judge decide. We hung up, and I sat in my quiet house feeling the weight of what was coming. I thought about the family dinners we used to have, about Christmases with grandkids, about the life I'd imagined when my sons were young. One had become the kind who stood for truth even when it hurt. The other had become the kind who tried to forge documents and spread lies. I mourned that. The loss of the family I thought I had. But I didn't regret protecting myself. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived. Inside was a notice from the county courthouse, a mediation date, a time and place where this would all come to a head. I held the envelope in my hand and realized there was no going back now. We were heading into a room where the truth would be spoken out loud, where evidence would be presented, where a third party would decide who was right and who was wrong. I set the notice on my kitchen counter and made myself a cup of tea. Then I called Natalie and said 2 words. I'm ready. The downtown courthouse had metal detectors at the entrance, security guards checking bags, the kind of building where serious things happened. Natalie met me in the lobby. She wore a gray suit, her red-framed glasses, and carried a briefcase that looked heavier than usual. Ready? She asked. I nodded, though my stomach was in knots. The mediation room was on the 3rd floor. Neutral beige walls, a long conference table, windows overlooking the city. A gray-haired woman with kind eyes and a spine of steel sat at the head of the table. The mediator. Jason was already there with his lawyer, a younger man who kept glancing nervously at the stack of folders Natalie carried. Ryan sat beside me, close enough that our elbows touched. Courtney was absent. The mediator introduced herself as Mrs. Morford and outlined the purpose: to address my petition for a protective order regarding financial harassment and to discuss formal disclaimers of inheritance. Jason scoffed when she said the word harassment. This is ridiculous, he muttered. I was trying to help my mother. Mrs. Morford held up a hand. Mr. Pollard, you'll have a chance to speak, but first, let's review the evidence that's been submitted. Natalie plugged her laptop into the monitor on the wall and pressed play. Jason's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable, the recording from the laundromat office. If we wait until she actually loses it, we lose control of the timeline. We need her to sign now, while she's still pliable." Courtney's voice followed. "We build a case. Capacity is a gray area, the right evaluator, the right narrative, and we can make a judge see that she's not fit to manage her own affairs." Jason shifted in his seat, face reddening. Then came the audio from the steakhouse, his own words hanging in the air again. "Sign, Mom, or we'll ruin you." The mediator's expression didn't change, but I saw her make a note. When the recordings finished, Natalie clicked to the next item. A screenshot of the bank's fraud alert showing Jason's email and phone number on a refinancing application I'd never submitted. Then a letter from the memory clinic confirming an evaluation appointment I'd never made. Then Betty Morrison's written statement about Jason, calling to spread concerns about my mental state. Finally, Ryan's written statement about Jason, asking him to sign a false letter documenting my supposed cognitive decline. Jason's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. "This is all blown out of proportion," Jason said, voice cracking. "I was trying to protect her. She's 68. She runs businesses. It's stressful. I was being proactive." "Proactive, Mrs." Morford repeated slowly. "Is that what you call opening loan inquiries in your mother's name using your email, or asking your brother to sign a statement saying she's confused when she's not?" Jason's jaw worked. "No money actually moved. Nothing happened." "Yet," Natalie said, "you attempted to move money. You attempted to build a false case. That's what matters here." Mrs. Morford folded her hands and turned to me. "Mrs. Pollard, what outcome are you seeking today?" I looked at my son, my firstborn, the child I'd held through fevers, the teenager I'd grounded for sneaking out, the man who'd walked beside me at Ryan's wedding. "I don't want to see Jason in handcuffs," I said quietly. "I don't want his kids visiting him in a jumpsuit, but I also won't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering what he'll try next." My voice steadied. "I want him legally barred from touching my assets, from representing himself as my agent. I want him to sign a disclaimer renouncing any claim to my estate beyond what I choose to leave him. And I want him to leave me alone unless he's prepared to act like a son again, not someone trying to steal from me." Jason flinched like I'd slapped him. Mrs. Morford looked at him. "Given the evidence on the table, I feel obligated to note that if your mother chooses to pursue criminal charges, this could move into a different arena. We are attempting to resolve it here instead. Signing a disclaimer and agreeing to a no-contact order would go a long way toward avoiding that." His lawyer whispered again, more urgently. Jason stared at the table for a long time. Finally, he looked up at me. "You'd really cut me out," he said, voice raw. I met his gaze. "You did that yourself. One threat, one forged login, one lie at a time." There was a pen in front of him. He stared at it the way he once stared at the keys to my car as a teenager, knowing that picking it up meant crossing a line he couldn't uncross. He picked it up. The room was so quiet I could hear the scratch of ink as he signed his name on the disclaimer, on the no-contact agreement, on the acknowledgement of my existing estate plan. When he finished, he dropped the pen like it had burned him. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "Maybe," I said, "but I'd regret handing my life's work to someone who threatened to ruin me more." I walked out of that building into bright daylight, feeling both lighter and lonelier than I had in years. 6 months passed. My world got smaller in some ways and bigger in others. Smaller, because Jason and his family disappeared from it. No more birthday texts, no more photos of the grandkids. My phone stayed quiet on holidays, which hurt more than I care to admit. Bigger, because the gaps left room for other things. I joined a group of retired women at the community center, all of us veterans of one service or another. We swapped stories about deployments and drills, and the strange way people assume gray hair means helplessness. I spent more time at the cabin with Ryan and his wife, teaching the grandkids how to bait a hook and skip rocks. We talked openly about boundaries, about money, about how love isn't something you can demand but something you invest in people over time. I set up a small scholarship fund at the community college for women over 50 starting their first businesses. Every time I signed another check, I thought of my parents' tiny house and the first laundromat with its rattling machines. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and let myself remember Jason as a little boy, holding up a crayon drawing of a house, declaring he'd buy me a mansion one day. In those moments, grief crept in. But grief is different from regret. Regret would have been signing those papers at Hunter's steakhouse. Regret would have been staying quiet when he started talking about ruining me. What I felt instead was a hard-won kind of peace. One afternoon, Ryan and I were cleaning out old boxes in the garage. He pulled out my faded Air Force duffel and set it on the workbench. "What's this?" he asked. I unzipped it, pulling out my old uniform jacket. The patches were worn, the name tape frayed. "You were really a big deal, huh?" he said, tracing the stripes with his finger. I laughed softly. I was just someone who knew how to count, how to see the whole board. He smiled. "You still do." As he carried another box inside, I thought back to that night at Hunter's steakhouse. "Before I let you go, I want to ask you something one more time. If you've made it this far in my story, if you've stayed with me through everything I've shared, I want to know what you think. Have you ever had to stand up to family? Have you ever had to choose protecting yourself over keeping the peace? Drop a comment and share your thoughts. And please, if this story meant something to you, if you think someone else needs to hear it, hit that like button and share this video. You never know who might be sitting alone right now, wondering if they're strong enough to say no to someone they love. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that we are. I thought about Jason's text that came through at 6:12 inches the evening, about walking into that private dining room and seeing 6 faces around the table, papers ready, threats loaded. They'd assumed I'd feel outnumbered, vulnerable, alone. What they'd forgotten is that I'd spent my life as the person people came to when things were out of control, the one who could look at chaos and see a path through it. That night, I'd counted 6 of them. I'd told them I only brought one. They thought I meant Natalie. But now, standing in my garage with my old uniform in my hands, I understood something deeper. The one I'd brought into that room wasn't just my attorney, though Natalie had been essential. The one I'd brought was the version of myself I'd spent a lifetime building. The master sergeant who'd learned to count what mattered. The business owner who'd survived a gambling husband and built something from nothing. The mother who'd loved her sons but refused to let love become a weapon against her. The woman who understood that sometimes protecting yourself is the most loving thing you can do, for everyone. Ryan called from inside, asking where I wanted a box of old Christmas decorations. I folded the uniform carefully and put it back in the duffel. "Coming," I called back. As I walked toward the house, I felt the afternoon sun on my face and thought about counting. They were 6. I was 1. But I was enough.